the eightfold path. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dhyana, dharana, samadhi. Yama, niyama are the disciplining of the mind, controlling of the sense organs, and following all the do's and don'ts of the society in which you live, following the mores of the group to which you belong. Well, yama, niyama are preparatory for any good living, not necessarily for the yoga. Yama, niyama are there for all good living. And then one who is seriously interested in tackling his mind, then he should asana. Asana is the first requisite. Asana is making the body rest without drawing the attention too much for itself. Sthira sukham asanam. Asana is nothing other than making the body steady and easy of posture. So Patanjali, at one stroke, according to my mind, dismisses all the contortions of the body that parade in the name of the asanas, which become the stuff and nonsense of the Hatha Yoga. So Patanjali has is not a party to the various asanas that are being prescribed. He says asana is in whatever posture you find pleasure, that's the asana for you. Sthira sukham asanam. And the easy posture must not drive you to, does not make you asleep. Sthira sukham asanam. So you must take care not to doze off. You must be alert, but you must not be troubled by the posture that you assume. Sthira sukham asanam. And then the breath control, pranayama, pratyahara is the restraining or the withdrawing of the sense organs from the various objects. These are called the bahiranga. They are external means and aradupakaraka. They are helpful to samadhi in a very distant, remote, indirect way. Patanjali very clearly says that these asanas are not the royal road to happiness. These are very distantly helpful. Arad upakaraka. Arad is from a distance. These help. Asana, pranayama, pratyahara, they help. But they are not sine qua non. They are not absolutely indispensable. You can dispense with them. But the more important things are dhyana, dharana, samadhi. Contemplation, cogitation, absorption of the mind and focusing of the mind. These are called the sakshad upakaraka. Directly they are the means of the samadhi. Well, Patanjali thus gives a scheme which involves the analysis of the human psyche. The normal mind, how does it behave? For example, I will give just this and shut my mouth. Well, the normal man's mind is kshipta. Kshipta is restless, wandering. Perhaps as a result of the stress of this lecture, you must have felt this kshipta, wandering. The mind begins to wander. The mind begins to be restless. Which means that the rajas is overactive. Rajas is overactive. The mind does not stay at one place. It moves hither and thither. Or Mudha is infatuated, indolent. After having listened to the lecture, perhaps some of you might really switch your mind off. So this is the Mudha. You are not bothered by stress because you have prevented it from entering into your mind. It may come into your ear, but you take care to shut it off from the mind. This is Mudha. Mudha is where there is a partition erected in one's mind between what comes in and what is being received. This is the play of the tamas. Tamas, nidra vruktivat. So, for all intents and purposes, The person is as if asleep. He is asleep with his eyes open. And then vikshipta. Vikshipta is mind naturally wanders, but now and then it catches up. There is an intensity of awareness which punctuates a series of these quick fleeting changes. So this is nanakshiptam, vikshiptamiti, kadachitka. Sometimes there is concentration. So the practitioners will find sometimes they can practice, but not always. Sometimes they can attend, not always. This is the vikshipta state. And then ekagra. Ekagra is one-pointed, focused attention. And finally niruddha, absolutely restrained. Things that you want have been clear in your mind, and everything else is precluded from it. This is niruddha. So this range, this orbit, this arc from kshipta, mudha, vikshipta, ekagra and niruddha, this is described in the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. So the kshipta is the mind of the normal man. Niruddha is the mind of the yogin. So yoga thus is a sort of a puraka, an auxiliary to the Samkhya system. And the Samkhya and yoga, they have influenced every system of thought in the country, including the Vedanta. And the direct offshoot of the alliance of this yoga and Samkhya is the Buddhist thought and the Jaina thought, which I will deal with tomorrow. One is positive, the other is negative. One is void and the other is substance. It's very similar.
The second one is the Parsi has Avesta.
Ah.
The origin of Avesta and whether it is
I'm not sure, because in Avesta, Zen Avesta, the language used is very closely akin to the language used here. But whether they had the fire rituals in the form of sacrifices, we don't know. But fire is a sacred symbol for them. And the ruling idea in Avesta is the eternal warfare or combat between the forces of good and the forces of evil, or Mazda and Ahriman, the two continually battling forces, which is reflected in the Rig Veda in terms of the combat between the Devas and the Asuras. Asuras like the Vratra, Indra and the Vratra. So you do find many common ideas, but I think it stops after a few similarities. The basic idea does not seem to be the same. For example, the entire Rigvedic corpus, it led towards the crystallization of the concept of dharma as that which supports everything, that which bears everything, that which holds everything up. But in Avesta, it does not lead to a concept like that. I am not sure, because this is my very cursory acquaintance with the Zoroastrian faith that leads me. I don't know, if anybody knows more about it, they should tell. It's what I feel. Well, I am told that we speak of the upadhis. Upadhi is a limiting adjunct. The purpose of the goal of a traditional man is to be free from all upadhis. So this is one upadhi like me which hinders me. Well, I am told that some of you would like to know about what Zen, Tao and Zen. and its comparison with the Indian thought. Tao, which strictly means the basic nature of things. The basic nature of things is quiet, subsidence of all upsurpage. So Tao is the way. Tao in Chinese means the road, the way, the path. The Tao is the path to this calm, this quiet. So the ideal is a hermit who has no aspirations whatsoever, no hankerings whatsoever, no hang-ups and hookups or anything in the world. One who is liberated, one who is like a bird, and he goes through life without leaving a trace, as the bird which flies in the air, leaving no track behind. So the Tao is an ideal which is a natural quiet, and the way to achieve this must be equally natural. So you can't go to endless trouble to be rid of the troubles. And I'm sure you know of an advice that a modern man gave to a rustic who was idling his time. So somebody asked him, why don't you go and work? Why should I work? Then you might get a job in some factory or some such thing. What if I get a job? You'll get a lot of money. And what if I get a lot of money? You will rise in status, and then you can hire people to do the work. You will be comfortable. Well, I'm comfortable now. Why should I take all the trouble to be comfortable? I'm comfortable now. Well, the Tao, there is a natural inclination on the part of man to be free from stress. Normally, we don't harness it. So, Tao is development of an insight by means of which suddenly and in a flash you get at the secret of all existence. You sit before a river, and as the river hurries through, you watch the river going in its own speed. Whatever the breeze, whatever the inclement weather outside it, the river goes on calmly as ever, and it goes on, does not complain, does not hurry, does not tarry. You suddenly develop an insight that this is how one must live. You must live like a river. Well, the Tao is reflected in our Sahajiya sects. There is what is known as the Natha Pantha. I don't know if you are acquainted. It is mostly in North India, especially in Bihar. And in Kharagpur, there is the center of the Nathapanthiya people, Gorakshanath, Chauranginath. So these are the lead. They have this Sahajiya cult. One must live absolutely naturally. We are troubled because we live unnaturally. You must live like the Greek Dionysian ideas. You must live like a dog. Eat when you are hungry, drink when you are thirsty, mate when you feel like it. Don't bother about anything else. So this is living naturally. Listen to the urges in your body. Do exactly accordingly. No regrets, no aspirations of any type. So living for moment to moment. This is the ideal of the Sahajiyas, Sahajiya cult. In Bengal also, there were the Bauls, and there were this group of people who have left the Dohas, and the Nath Siddha cult is very much like the Tao cult. Well, Zen is little more related to Indian thought. Tao developed independently. Tao does not owe to Indian thought at all. But Zen is directly an offshoot of the Indian dhyana system. Bodhidharma, who was a resident of Kanchipuram, went to China, Nanking, around the 6th century, in the 6th century. And they took Buddhism from India to China. And from China, it went to Korea, and from Korea, it went to Japan. And the type of Buddhism that Bodhidharma, he is celebrated in Japan as Daruma. And you might have seen dolls which are made in solid brass, and whatever way you place it, it will stand up. You must have seen. These are Daruma pictures. And you must have seen pictures of the laughing Buddha holding. This is the representation of Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma, a monk from Kanchipuram in south, who went to. So the type of Buddhism that he took from here is the type of Buddhism that emphasized quiet contemplation. And the Sanskrit word for it is dhyana. And in the Pali version of it, it becomes jhana. In Chinese, it became chahan. And in Japan, it became Zen. So Zen is a direct emergence of the dhyana cult. And Bodhidharma is considered as the patriarch of the Zen philosophy. The Zen is one of the many schools of Buddhism that thrive in Japan. One of them, the other sects are the Lotus Land sect, etc., etc. But the Zen distinguishes itself from all other sects by, number one, no rituals whatsoever. No rituals of any kind. Number two, no adoration of the Buddha beyond as a pathfinder. And several stories are told. Zen monks were taking shelter on a rainy evening in a monastery. The abbot made them welcome, and he lit a fire to keep them warm. And then when the embers diminished and there was no fuel, the main idol of the Buddha, which was made out of wood, was brought out and put into the fire. And some people were flabbergasted at this. They were insulted. Well, this abbot turned and said, Buddha was born to keep you warm. Why do you complain? There is the spirit of Zen. Well, there is no idolatry of any kind. Buddha is not adored, although they are all Buddhists. Buddha is not adored beyond being a pathfinder. And number three, there is no one path which is applicable to all people. Each individual should find out his own path. There is no one path which can be shared by many people. So Zen people insist that every individual must develop an enlightenment through the means that come most naturally to him. And the enlightenment is a sudden burst of enlightenment, which they call satori. Satori is a flash of enlightenment. So enlightenment does not come as a result of systematic practice for long hours, but it comes on a sudden, in a flash. And this is what is going to transform the individual life. So anything that happens leisurely, in slow measures, is not likely to be far-reaching in its effect. What happens suddenly, that will tell on the individual. So all the other schools of Buddhism in Japan, they believe in the slow, they are called the slow schools. They practice rituals for long hours. They worship the Buddha and they recite the the mantras over a period, and then try to reach this enlightenment in several stages. But not so the Zen people. Their enlightenment is sudden, immediate, and for this they have evolved several techniques. One of them is the teacher, before admitting a student to his own monastery, he will pose certain questions to him. He must answer the questions. These are called the koans. Koan is an enigmatic question, like, what's the sound that you hear when you clap your hand with one hand? A question is not meant to be answered intellectually. You don't take all the trouble to find an answer for it, because the question has no answer. So patently the question has no answer whatsoever. But when you really hear that sound which emerges out of the one hand clapping, you have obtained the enlightenment. So the koan is one of the techniques by means of which the normal habits of mind are unsettled. Whenever a question is asked, you think in terms of the usual things that your mind is used to. Well, the mind should be disabused of the normal ways of thinking. You must think in a new way, and this new way must dawn on you and must not be inculcated into you by somebody else. So whatever is taught by the Buddha is dung heap. One of the Zen sayings is, whatever is taught by the Buddha is dung heap. What you discover on your own is a gold nugget. So the Buddha gave some precepts, but it is for you to pierce through them and find out what really did the Buddha teach. Well, another favorite Zen meditations is, what's the significance of the Bodhi or the awakening? The Buddha, according to the legend, did tapasya for 7 long years in the Uruvilva forest. Then he sat under the Bodhi tree, recognizing that the penances were leading him nowhere. And then he got the enlightenment. What was the nature of enlightenment that he got? What was it that transformed a mere man into an awakened one? So this is a favorite. So they try to put themselves in the position of the Buddha and work out what it means to be enlightened. What's the significance of some Bodhi? So Zen is an individual approach to enlightenment, and they don't dispute with the world. They don't quarrel with their surroundings. They try to live apart from them, but not contrary to the others around them. One of the frequent sayings of the Zen is, before you take to the path of Zen, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. But when you are walking on the path of Zen, mountains are not mountains and the rivers are not rivers. They are something else. When you have obtained the enlightenment, the mountains are mountains and the rivers are rivers. So the enlightened man is no different from the ordinary man at all, except in the perspective. So he lives like any one of us, but his orientation is altogether different. So Zen has some of these peculiar ideas which have been very popular in Japan even to this day, and it has produced remarkable poetry. The half couplets of the Zen people is very interesting, and it has produced art, and the typical Japanese outlook on art, that it is the empty space that gives more meaning. You might have seen Japanese paintings. a large blank paper, just a small line wading through it, and it distinguishes the horizon, the atmosphere from the earth, and it's so meaningful. Where does the meaning consist in? Not in this line, but in the empty patches. So they attach a lot of importance to things unsaid, which you have to find in yourself, in experience. So Zen people, they have no scripture to rely upon. The other Buddhists, they have the Tripitakas, they have the various scriptural texts on which they rely. But the Zen people have no scriptural texts at all. They don't rely on the sayings of the Buddha. But they take to heart the guidance of the teacher. So Zen is an intimate relationship between a teacher and a student, and the discipline that comes as a result of their interaction. So Zen is in this way a sort of an extra Indian growth. So comparable to these things, there is nothing in India that we have. But these have grown out of the Indian dhyana system, but it is typically Japanese. More Chinese than Japanese originally, but later on it was more Japanese than Chinese. So Chan was not advocated, was not patronized by the ruling monarchs of China, but in Japan it was always a hot favorite of the princelings and the nobility. And there was a class of warriors called the samurai, to whom death meant nothing. Life and death were the same to them. They were Zen practitioners. They were undaunted in their life, and their meaning in life was confined to their own heads. They did not try to seek meaning outside themselves. Well, so, koan is a teasing question. The first impulse is to answer the question in the same words as the question is put. Question is put intellectually. What's the sound of one hand clap? When you clap your one hand, what's the sound? So clapping is familiar to all of us. Hands being used for clapping is familiar to us. Sound coming out of it is familiar to us. But there is a slight twist here. It's not two hands clapping, it's one hand clapping only. Is it half the sound? Is it? So the mind tries to answer it in ways which are familiar to it, but suddenly you must get out of it. And when an individual pupil, disciple, answers it in this way, what was the smile of the Buddha's face? Or what's the face of an unborn baby? How charming is the face of an unborn baby? So these are all the koans. But when you try to answer it in an intellectual way, you are flagged. The teacher hits you on the back, and the beating will waken you up to reality. So this is not to be answered intellectually. There is another way of answering this, and this is by the heart. So it is not using the head, it is using the heart. Understanding the significance of the question. Is that all right? Or? No, not separation in that way, because in actuality they can never be separated. I said that you can't think of a Purusha without Prakriti, nor a Prakriti without Purusha. The two in one. It's like two in one. It's one Tattva with Purusha and Prakriti. But in normal life, it is the Prakriti that dominates us. And the Purusha is male principle. Prakriti is a feminine principle. And in Samkhya, Purusha is called the Samkhya, in old terminology, when we were youngsters, when you had to refer to a man who was absolutely useless, was not participating in his household work, who was a dullard and dunce, you would call him Samkhya Purusha. Samkhya Purusha is a Purusha not worth his name. He is a witness, he is a mere witness, he does not participate in anything. But Prakriti is everything. Prakriti is the matrix, the mother. And the Tantra system, which believes in the Prakriti dominance, Prakriti Pradhanya, is from the Samkhya only. Well, at no time is the Purusha separated from Prakriti, not Prakriti from Purusha, they are together. But the domination of the Prakriti is not felt when this Kaivalya takes place. Purusha is isolated, like what I said now, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. Even for an enlightened man, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. But the Kaivalya, they call it Jivan Mukti. An individual has liberated himself. He lives with his wife. He has all the troubles in life, but he remains unattached. He is quite happy. In the midst of troubles, he can smile, but not so the ordinary man. So, the separation of Prakriti and Purusha is only in that sense. Purusha feels that he is not under the trammels of Prakriti. He is freed from Prakriti. Prakriti is the bondage. He is free from the bondage. He is liberated while still in his body. Because the Sankhyans don't believe in a liberation after death. So liberation is not a post-mortem experience. You have to experience it here and now. So living in the world, you are not of the world. Living amidst all the troubles, you are not troubled by the world. You retain a sort of a distance, mentally.
So what would be the reaction of the other man who has got control over it, say, Purusha? No, they have gone the idol. Similar situation was there. Say a man who has conquered his mind and Purusha, and he is exposed. What would be his reaction?
His reaction.
The world is there. Will be able to tolerate and be smiling. He will look for something to protect himself from cold.
No, that's the description of Dhista Prajna in Bhagavad Gita. If good comes to him, he feels the same. If bad comes to him, he feels the same. He does not get agitated. He receives everything equably. That samadha utisthati. Same description. Like a Jivan Mukta. He is liberated. He does everything that a normal man does. But he is not troubled. And the same thing happens for a mental defective. Even he is not troubled. So that's why they say a sage, a madman, a child and a lunatic are alike. He lives like a child. He is happy with whatever comes to his lot. He does not aspire for anything. He does not regret. He does not aspire. And that's what we all want to achieve. That state of non-participating observer. That he does. He sleeps, he eats, he does everything else. He desire to live, of course he has. He does not negate his life, he does not commit suicide. He continues to live. Vedanta, I am afraid, may not come separately, because tomorrow I want to deal with Jainism and Buddhism. If on the other hand you want me to deal with Vedanta, I will do it tomorrow. What's the consensus? I'll try to do it. Yoga is the means. Yoga, Samkhya is the theory, yoga is the practice. Ishvara is only something to focus your attention on.
That is in yoga.
That's in yoga.
But in Samkhya,
Hmm.
things even in such state.
Hmm.
Have they said anything what is the means to attain?
No. Yoga is the practical aspect of Samkhya. Samkhya is purely theoretical. Yoga is practical.
There is a continuous dichotomy through. Probably you would sit down and meditate and separate the two. But while you are involved in karma, you are also involved in the materialistic world.
Because you have a body which has its needs. You can't do without them, isn't it? You have to eat, you have to drink, you have to satisfy the physiological and psychological needs. Man has needs. And you can't sit and contemplate naturally.
What is the correlation? I mean, if you are one side you have to achieve this higher suppose as per
The correlation is in the ashrama concept. The entire span of human life is divided into several convenient phases. In the first phase, you try to learn the mores of the group in which you live. You learn. This is the brahmacharya. You go to a teacher, you learn, you see, look around, you learn, and you learn the wherewithal for life. And then when you have reached an age of maturity, you marry, start a family, get into the society as an active participant, you have your duties, responsibilities, and as a householder and citizen, the grahastha will have to satisfy the artha and the kama. Artha, kama, and dharma of course is all through. So the needs of the body, the needs of the individual, the needs of those around you, the needs of the community in which you live, they are all taken care of in this grahastha. When you have reached your old age, and in the old books, the old age is reached when early in the morning you wake up and look at your palm and you don't recognize the lines there, you don't see the lines there. That means it's time for you to leave. Now that prescription does not hold now. Well, when you have reached that stage, that's to say, when you have done your duty to your family, to the community around you, when you have sons who are grown up, who can take care of the family, it's time for you to walk out of the household, walk out of the society, live in a neighboring retreat, forest retreat. This is called the vanaprastha. There you live with your wife. You live in close contact with the community, not participating in it. But anybody could come to you, take your advice at council. You are a senior citizen. You are wanted by the group. And when you have done this duty also, or when the wife dies, when you are left, you are free to walk out into wilderness all alone, like the horn of a rhinoceros, khadga vishana iva. That is the sannyasa state. There you have no duties, no responsibilities whatsoever. You are entirely free to do what you feel like. So that is the commitment only to yourself. But till then, you have all the other gamut. Yes.
So it is not that at some stage you start giving more importance to the other and probably you may not be doing the right thing at that time.
You won't be, because the vairagya or the dispassion or the spirit of renunciation, according to the text, is ashesha samsarika dukkha darshanat jata vairagya. So renunciation and dispassion must come only when you have gone through life, enjoyed and suffered. Then if you feel that all this is meaningless, that is real sannyasa. Not when you have failed and in a moment of despair you take to sannyasa. That's all our godmen, what they are doing. But real sannyasa is what comes naturally to you when you grow up, live your life, and then you find suddenly that there is something higher. There is a call which is higher. That's the real renunciation.
Secondly, I wanted to ask you the word Brahman you use. Brahman you use. In the Vedic period, you said that actually Brahma, Vishnu, all this came from the Puranic age.
Brahma, the word comes from the root brih. Brih is to grow. Brahma is that which has grown. The entire universe is Brahma. That which has grown into all this, that which is formless, has assumed all these forms. So that is an Upanishadic concept. You don't find the word Brahma in the Veda, Rig Veda. So Upanishads equate this Brahma with Atman. Just as the Atman pervades your entire structure, from your toenail to the tip of your hair, there is Atman. Likewise, in the entire universe, this Brahman pervades. So, this Atman and Brahman are pervasive principles. So, that's the Upanishadic viewpoint. In the Puranic age, this Brahma, the Brahman in the neuter gender. In the Puranic age, it is a masculine Brahma, the four-faced Brahma who was the creator, as distinguished from Vishnu the preserver, Rudra the destroyer. That is a Puranic concept and it is theistic. There is greater religious significance for it than philosophical significance.
I wanted one clarification. Do the Vedas address only the man and not the woman? In the shlokas, the way they talk about stages in life, is it in reference to what a man should be doing?
No, even women, to all people, even animals are addressed. Even animals are addressed. As I said, Veda is an inspired utterance. So where the male-female dichotomy is not possible. There are both of them together. Yes. And in the olden days, there was the Upanayana Samskara even for the women. Only after the advent of the Muslims that was given up. So the inferior position that the woman employs is only during the Middle Ages and later. So till then, woman in fact was more important than man. Of course, Nyaya and Vaisheshika, I thought earlier of doing justice to those twin schools because the schools contain very valuable information about the methodology, the pramana, the prameya and the various discussions. Now on second thoughts, we shouldn't leave out Buddhism, Jainism, and yesterday there was a demand for Vedanta also. So I thought I would cover those three before bidding you goodbye. Well, what I said earlier, that the Western Indorges have done a lot of good to the country. They have discovered texts, they have edited the manuscripts, they have translated them, they have printed them, and they have brought new light on several of the Indian books. But there is always a kink in their heads, and they had a genius for ignoring Indian tradition altogether. They came with a conviction that Indian tradition either does not exist or is not worth bothering one's head about. So while discussing any of these philosophical systems, they uniformly dismissed all native accounts, what they call the native accounts all the indigenous tradition that we had systematically. And it is most classically illustrated in the field of Buddhism. We have such a variety of misconceptions about Buddhism that it has taken quite a long time for us to disabuse ourselves of some of these misconceptions. For example, Edwin Arnold wrote a book, The Light of Asia, which was supposed to be the life of the Buddha. It became very popular, and he based that account on two Sanskrit poems, romantic poems, Buddha Charita by Ashwaghosha and Lalita Vistara, an anonymous text, where piecemeal information about Buddha's career is woven into legendary accounts. And by a strange irony, even the savants, scholars and researchers chose to take a poem by Edwin Arnold as authentic, authoritative. The life of the Buddha that Vincent Smith gave in his History of India, which has entered into all textbooks and which we are fed upon right from our early days, is such nonsense that one who bothers to look into the Indian tradition would find how stupid we were to be taken for a ride. For example, we are all told, and we all believe, that Gautama left in the midnight, leaving his wife and newborn babe to a life of renunciation. Is it not what we all live? Mahavinishkaramana is going away. Nowhere in the Pali or Sanskrit text do you find a justification for this episode. On the other hand, the Pali texts point out that when the Buddha left home, his father and mother cried and prevailed upon him not to leave, but he left. There is no mention of his wife, and there is a mention that he was still young in years, he was not married. Mata pitundam assumukhanam rudantanam kesamassum voharetva agarasma anagariyam pabbaji. Buddha himself relates that I left home. Mother were trying to prevent me from going. Well, this sort of misinformation has been systematically being bartered out to the Indians. And Vincent Smith has again been very vociferous in pointing out that Buddhism has been a splinter group. It has been a sort of a rebellion or a revolt. It was anti-Vedic in character, anti-tradition. Buddha tried to chalk out a new path altogether. The Indian tradition has no justification for this. The Buddha himself says, Isippavvedito dharmo, what I am teaching you is the doctrine taught by the rishis. Isippavvedito dharmo, yesa dhammo sanantano. This is the Sanatana Dharma that I am teaching. Yesa Vedopanishad. What I am telling you is the Veda and the Upanishad. And that Buddha or his teaching went against the Vedic tradition, went against the orthodox tradition, is nowhere to be found in Vatsyayana's commentary or in Shankara's commentary on the Brahma Sutras. He criticizes two of the Buddhist schools, but he does not say that Buddhism was heterodox. He does not say that it is anti-Vedic, anti-tradition. And the earliest disciples of the Buddha, the direct disciples of the Buddha, were all Brahmins. Pindola Bharadwaja, Kusika, Kassapa. So, and in the Ashokan inscriptions, 3rd century BC, you don't find a single reference to any cult or sect in Buddha's name. There is no mention of a Buddhist sect or a Buddhist group, even during Ashoka's days. But there was a cleavage, Sramana Brahmana. There was one group who were Sramanas or ascetics, another group who were the Brahmanas or the Karmakandins. Well, like this, we are fed with a lot of wrong information. And Rhys Davids, husband and wife team, they did a lot of good work in editing the Pali texts which were current in Ceylon. But when they had the Pali Text Society and they published all the Pali Tripitaka, they also wrote a book to claim that the Pali texts were the earliest of the Buddhist records. Well, curiously, I don't know how scholars gulped this down. In our own family of Sanskrit languages in the country, Pali is never a language. It was never a language which was spoken anywhere. And Pali does not find a mention among the Prakrits at all. But Rhys Davids has written a book to show that Pali was the language spoken by the Buddha at that time. And he chose to speak in the dialect of the people so that they could understand. And the Pali books Indians lost, but the Ceylonese people preserved it in their monasteries. So Rhys Davids had to arrive on the scene to discover that for India. Well, actually, we didn't have a Pali canon at all. It is a sort of a spurious production of the Ceylonese in the 4th or the 5th century. The early texts were all Sanskrit texts which have been discovered in the Middle East and Turkestan. So Sarvastivada, Tripitaka is in Sanskrit. So the early Sanskrit texts, the early Buddhist texts are all in Sanskrit. And in the dialects which were spoken in India, like the Paishachi, like the Maharashtriya Prakrita, like the Apabhrangsha, and Sanskrit, classical Sanskrit. So this Pali being foisted as the early phase of Buddhism is a trick on scholarship. Well, Dr. Ananda Kumar Swami, I am sure you must have heard of his name, Dr. Ananda Kentesh Kumar Swami, tried his best to point out that this whole thing is a wrong appraisal. That the Sarvastivada text, which was discovered for the first time in the northwestern frontier provinces in a monastery, they are the earliest texts. Well, anyway, why I mentioned this is there is such a lot of misconception about Buddhism that what I now tell you might sometimes appear like blasphemous, as Dr. Raja Ramana mentioned it to me. Well, the Buddha, again, the scholars point out that the rest of Hinduism has no known founder. Buddha and Mahavira, they gave currency to sects in their own name, religious denominations in their own name. So they are like Christianity and Mohammedanism, personal religions. Well, any Buddhist, a practicing Buddhist, as soon as he gets up in the morning, he prays not to the historical Buddha who lived 2500 years ago, but to the Buddhas that have gone in the past. Yeja Buddha atitacha, yeja Buddha anagata, pratyutpanna cha ye Buddha, aham vandami sabbada. I pray to all the Buddhas that have gone by, and to all the Buddhas that are going to come, and to all the Buddhas that are now existing. So Buddhism is by no stretch of imagination a personal religion. It is not bound with the life of one historical person called Gautama the Buddha. Gautama the Buddha merely represented an old tradition, and he spoke very emphatically, very effectively, so that his name was remembered. His figure was honored. Even so, Jainism, this Mahavira, who is oftentimes taken as the founder of Jainism, according to the Jains, he is not a founder at all. This is why I say the Western scholars had a contempt for the local traditions. You ask any Jain, the Jain will not say that Jainism was founded by Mahavira. Mahavira was one of the Tirthankaras, the 24th Tirthankara. Before him there were 23 Tirthankaras, Parshva, Nami, Nemi, going back to Rishabhanatha. So Jainism is an immemorial religion. So no Jaina will admit that Jainism came from Mahavira. Well, Buddhism is thus not a personal religion. It is like Samkhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Vedanta. It is an impersonal religion, a truth that was handed down by generations of teachers and students, and which contained prescriptions of various types. Well, the Buddhism as we find it today, Buddhism was not a sect. At best, don't we have the Ramakrishna Mission group, the Rajneesh group, the Chinmayananda group, and the Aurobindo group, and things of this. Buddhism must have been one of the denominations like that. Jainism must have been one of the denominations like that. It was not a different sect or creed or doctrine or system at all. Well, it's one of the curious ironies of history. Both Gautama Buddha and Vardhamana Mahavira came from the same province, what is now covered by part of UP and part of Bihar, what was called Magadha in the olden days. Buddha and Mahavira were contemporaries. Mahavira is a senior contemporary of the Buddha, and you find the Buddhist texts mention about the Mahavira's teachings. And the students of Mahavira come to the Buddha and tell him about the teaching of Mahavira. And Buddha has a great respect for him. He is a Ganachariyo, Auso, he is a respected teacher. Buddha has a respect for Mahavira. And they were both of them itinerant monks. They wouldn't stay in any place for more than 3 nights as ascetics. They would be continuously wandering. And both Buddha and Mahavira confined their wanderings to their own place, Magadha, parts of UP and parts of the present day Bihar. And they were continuously on the move. The students of both of them met, but it is curious, the two never met. It did not chance that Mahavira and Buddha met at all, although they were continuously moving about, wandering about in a limited area. Well, Jainism and Buddhism thus, they were both expressions of an old tradition which is called the Sramana tradition. Samkhya Yoga after the Upanishads and the Nyaya Vaisheshika and the Vedanta on the other, it brought about a cleavage of traditions in the country. One was where an emphasis was given to knowledge, wisdom, and a life of renunciation, a life of asceticism, a life of voluntary privations. This was the Sramana tradition, where the ultimate realization couldn't be had unless you took to a rigorous path of penances, austerities, privations, and so on. When the other group, they believed in the ritualistic actions, and knowledge was incidental to the purity accomplished by the ritualistic deeds. This was the Brahmana tradition. So right from the Upanishadic days, we have these two strands, Shramana Brahmana traditions. And in the Ashokan inscriptions, where he donates lands for the monasteries, Ashoka mentions Shramana Brahmaniye. He gives lands to the Shramanas and to the Brahmanas. There is no mention of Buddhism at all in the Ashokan inscriptions. In any of the inscriptions of Ashoka, you don't find Buddhism as a group or a sect. He frequently mentions Shramana Brahmaniye. These two traditions, Shramana tradition and the Brahmana tradition. Shramana tradition is not necessarily Buddhism alone. There were as many as 10 teachers, wandering teachers, who are mentioned in the Buddhist texts like Purana Kashyapa, Kakuda Katyayana, and Mahavira, Nigantho, Nataputto is one of them. So Jainism and Buddhism sprang out of this Shramana tradition, where even today a great importance is given to the ascetics, to the monks and nuns in both these traditions. In Jainism as well as Buddhism, a great respect is attached to monks and nuns, and it's considered to be the royal road to Kaivalya or the emancipation. Well, it's a long story, 2500 years, and Buddhism is even now a living force. And it's wrong to say that Shankara came on the scene and drove Buddhism out of the country. Buddhism had disappeared from the country even in the 2nd century AD. And the first attack on Buddhists on a large scale was by the Muslims when they ransacked and attacked the great monasteries of Nalanda, Jagadala, Vikramashila and Takshashila. These were the monasteries which were entirely Buddhist in character. So when these monasteries were destroyed, many Buddhist monks were slaughtered. So they took to their heels and went outside to the Himalayan countries. So that was the first time Buddhists fled to Tibet, Nepal, China, Korea, and down here Sumatra, Borneo, Java, Bali, etc., etc. Well, Buddhism, it had 2nd century AD. No. Even then it went out. There were scholars who sought to go out. But the Muslim invasion came later on, latter part of the 9th century. But even in 2nd century, Buddhism was not a force in the country. Because it was not a separate group for one thing. And it was already a part and parcel of Mahayana creed. Mahayana did not distinguish between the local Hindu cults and the new Buddhist ideas. Buddha was made a god, was made one of the incarnations of Vishnu. So it didn't have a separate stamp of its own. But there were still Buddhist monks who were proficient in the Tripitakas. There were Mahayana monks, there were Hinayana monks, but they were all in these monasteries. So that gave a death blow. But even earlier it had disappeared from the mainland.
Islam itself is 1000 years old.
9th century, 10th century, 14th century, because Nalanda University was ransacked by the Muslims. By Hindus? I don't know. Well, anyway, that's an argument for the BJP people. Well, so Buddhism had two distinct groups, two distinct divisions. One is what is called Hinayana. The other is what is called Mahayana. The Hinayana is prevalent in Ceylon and the countries which are in the south. And Mahayana, it prevailed originally in Magadha, in the Himalayan regions. Then it went to Tibet, Nepal, Tibet, Korea, China, Japan. This is called the Mahayana. The word Mahayana And Hinayana is distinguished in the text by two terms, Sravakayana and Bodhisattvayana. Sravakayana, it means the individual does not renounce his life entirely. He takes to a course of discipline, a course which is a wayfarer's path, Sravaka. So he listens to the Buddha's teachings, he follows the various prescriptions of life as indicated by the Buddha, and after a tenure they seek to renounce, they become monks, nuns, and live all alone. They try to seek their salvation at an individual level, at a personal level. So every monk aspires to reach the salvation all by himself, turning his back on society. Well, the Mahayana people, they believe that it's a great boat wherein an individual lives normally. He does not cease being a householder, but he attaches importance to helping others, showing compassion to the people, engaging themselves in service to others, and through this means qualifying oneself for nirvana, because the essential nature of the Buddha is compassion, karuna, and the other is prajna, prajna or wisdom. So the Buddha has this prajna as well as karuna, while the Sravakayana emphasized on the prajna aspect or the wisdom aspect. The Mahayana emphasized the karuna aspect. So the Bodhisattva is one who is eligible to reach nirvana here and now, but it defers nirvana until every other creature reaches this highest state. So Bodhisattva is, he has the bodhi or enlightenment in his essence, but he defers it till everyone else reaches this enlightenment. Well, both the schools accept that the Buddha taught the four great truths. This is called the Arya Satyas. I mentioned about the starting point of the Samkhya, Tapatraya, or the threefold misery that every individual was heir to, and the urgent need to escape from this hold of misery. Buddha takes the same standpoint. He discovered that dukkha was a reality. Dukkha is the first Arya Satya. He relates later on to his disciples that sitting under the Bodhi tree, contemplating on his own being and the nature of the entire world, he arrived at a conclusion which was incontrovertible, that there was dukkha in the world. Dukkham iti. The dukkha is a stress, not misery, but a stress. Life involves stress, bodily as well as mental. The second great truth that he arrived at was, this stress has not come accidentally or on its own. It has a cause, it has an origination, dukkha samudaya. There are certain factors which lead to this stress. There are some preconditions which bring about this stress. So stress is brought about. Stress is not the nature of things. Stress is what has been brought about, dukkha samudaya. And dukkha being what is brought about, it can also be eradicated. It can also be made null and void. This is dukkha nirodha, the third truth. And the fourth truth is that there is a method to do away with suffering. do away with dukkha. This is the marga. So the Buddha's 4 principles, the Arya Satyas that he discovered, dukkha, dukkha samudaya, dukkha nirodha, and dukkha nirodha gamini patipada, the path that leads to the avoidance of the dukkha. Well, all Buddhist philosophy rests on these 4 great truths. And in Buddhist texts, there is an analysis of suffering. And there is a small monograph by me, which was published long ago, and it was called The Anatomy of Suffering. So anatomy I used because at that time I was busy with physiology and neurology. So when I was interested in Buddhism, I thought this anatomy of suffering would be a good title for it. But it deals with the Buddhist explanation for stress. How does stress come about? How does the individual find himself in the midst of several stressful conditions? So Buddha said, the very structure of the human being is prone to this suffering. And in the analysis of the human psyche, he pointed out that there are 5 ingredients which go to make up a human being. The first is the physical body that you have, made up of the elements and which continually undergoes change. This they call the rupa. Rupa, rupyate iti rupam. Rupa is form, but the form which continually changes. The body does not stay stagnant, it continually changes. Well, the second one is the contact between the individual on the one hand and the world on the other through the avenue of the sense organs. This he called the Vedana, the feelings, the sensations that we have, the perceptions, and so on and so forth, where the body is a meeting ground between the world outside and the individual within the body. So this he called the transactional arc, he called the Vedana. And then third is the various mental processes that are there in identifying the objects, naming them. This he called the Samkhya. Just as a carpenter breaks down the tree, makes so many planks and marks them to make a cot or a chair later on, even so, whenever we get an experience of an outside object, we make a mental note of it. We give a verbal label to it. We verbalize. We call it by a name. So we conceive of things. We not merely perceive, we conceive. So the Buddha said, the sensations are the operations of the sense organs. But there is a higher principle involved, the mind. The mind evaluates the sensations. It reappraises them. It involves the previous experience with regard to the present experience and makes a concept out of a percept. There is a sensation, the sensation evolves into a percept, and the percept is further evolved into a concept, a conception. This the Buddha called Samkhya. Samkhya. Jna is to know, some is well. To know well, you give a name to it. So the naming faculty, the verbalization, attaching verbal labels to everything that we know is a human phenomenon. Well, the fourth factor is every time an experience is had, an impression is left behind, a trace is left behind, and the new experience is primed by the previous experiences we already have had. So these impressions which are latent and which color the present perception, the Buddha called samskara. Samskara are the latent impressions in the mind of man, which will enable us not merely to see an object, but to recognize an object. You see a man once, twice, thrice, and the fourth time you see him, you not merely know his name, but you know what personality he has, what character he has. All this is the work of the samskara, not the eye or the mind. So the samskara has a different connotation in the later Hindu, but the Buddha called this impression, latent impressions, a storehouse of memory images that we have, which will prime the perception that we have now. And lastly, there is a core of the human being which remains continuous and unobtrusive. It does not obtrude into anything, but it is there as a bedrock, as a core, as a background. The Buddha called it vijnana, or the consciousness. So the individual is distinguished by a consciousness which he shares with all the human beings, all the animals, all the plants. In fact, this consciousness is a universal principle. And where one individual differs from the other is with regard to the other four: samskara, samkhya, vedana and rupa. The bodies differ, the minds differ, the latent impressions differ, but the basic awareness or consciousness is the one prevailing principle. And the Buddha spoke of a consciousness which is like a stream, like a pravaha, a stream of consciousness. The moment an individual is born, the stream of consciousness starts, and till he dies, this stream goes on. This is a flow of consciousness. This is what is called the bhavanga sota. Consciousness as an aspect of life, as an aspect of the living process. So life is equated with consciousness. It goes on. But every time you perceive, every time you have an experience, this flow is obstructed. The flow takes a canal sort of thing. It is channelized towards an object. So this bhavanga, uchcheda, there is a damming up of this flow. Every time we have an experience, every time we have a thought, every time we have a sensation, every time we have an urge, every time we have an aspiration, this causes stress. If the flow is allowed to go smoothly on, there will be no stress at all. But this bhavanga sota is frequently interrupted. When you are listening to me, there is no stream of consciousness at all. It is dammed up now and then. Now it tries to resume, again it is blocked. Every time you hear something, this consciousness is blocked. So Buddha said, this bhavanga or the stream of consciousness is made to take a road. This is called vithi chitta. Vithi is the road. So every time I hear a sound, the flow of consciousness which is natural is dammed up and it takes a route towards that object which I see or hear or smell or taste. So this consciousness, instead of going smoothly and uniformly in one direction, is dammed up and is drawn into several channels, several roadways, several pathways, and this results in the dukkha. So his analysis of stress is because we don't allow this bhavanga to flow on smoothly, but the damming up of the consciousness now and then, very frequently, is the very operation of life. Life itself involves this. So, this dukkha is tied up with this concept of the skandhas. The skandha are the aspects. And I will not go into further details about the Dvadashanga, the Prakritya Samutpada, and so on. The major contributions of Buddhism to Indian thought, number one, it's in the sayings of the Buddha that we get for the first time a clear enunciation of the karma theory. So in the earlier texts, you don't find this karma theory being so explicitly described. Buddha, for the first time, he says that we don't live one life alone, and death is not a wall, death is a door. We pass through death to another life. So this goes on in an interminable series. So this is called the bhava pratyaya, a series of births and deaths, jara marana, growing old, dying, being born again, growing up, dying, etc., etc. And for an individual to be constantly dying and being reborn is not new. The Buddha's analysis is, every time a thought is born, it's a new life. And every thought, a new thought comes into being, the old thought is dead. The old thought dies and the new thought arises. And the old cells die and the new cells arise. And the bloodstream, it is constantly being replenished. So this dying and being born again is the very law of life. So the Buddha gave for the first time the karma theory to the country. This karma theory involves the theory of rebirth, punarjanma. The second great contribution of Buddhism is the concept of avidya, or the basic ignorance. When an individual is born, he does not know the meaning of life, the goal of life, the welfare of the individual. So the individual has to learn all this. And this avidya is what makes us all bound to the phenomenal world. So this avidya was taken by the Vedanta later on. This avidya was expanded to cover the concept of Maya. So you find in the Vedanta the concept of avidya and Maya being very important factors. But the initial impetus came from the Buddha. The cause of dukkha is ignorance. Because we don't know, we desire. This is called trishna. Trishna is the desire. We desire. And when we desire an object, we willy-nilly become dependent on the object. We become mentally hung up on the object. This is the Buddha called the upadana. So the entire tree of suffering is ascribed to the desire that you have, and the desire is the desire to continue existence, bhava trishna. The basic desire, or what the biologists would call the survival instinct. No one would like to die, one would like to survive, continue. This the Buddha called bhava trishna, the desire to live on. Having got life, you don't want to lose it. And then you are not content with the present stage of life. You want to improve upon it. You want to progress. You want to go ahead. You want to acquire wealth, acquire power, acquire fame, this and that. The Buddha called this vibhava trishna. Bhava trishna is living, urge to live. And the second is urge to prosper, urge to go on. And third is the desire to get to the final state. This is called Nibbana Tanha. The desire to end all this. Nibbana. Nibbana is Nirvana. Nirvana Trishna. The desire or the hankering for the final resting, like the lotus eaters. There is no more to go, we come to an end. So Buddha analyzed the entire human existence as a sort of a play between these three fundamental urges: the urge to live, the urge to prosper, and the urge to release oneself, to emancipate oneself. So the Buddha pointed out that all this desire is due to our lack of understanding the nature of things. We don't understand what it is to desire, what it is to be attached to a thing. The Buddha called this entire lack of knowledge under one head avidya or avidya, which leads to trishna. Trishna leads to upadana. Upadana leads to several other things. And finally, dukkha skandha. Dukkha comes into being. The second important contribution, or the third important contribution of the Buddhist thought is, while philosophizing, while thinking about the ultimate nature of things, you have to take into consideration two standpoints. The one, the transactional standpoint, here and now. I have a body, I have sense organs, I belong to a particular family, I belong to a particular community, I live on a particular tract of land, and I have a present equipment with their own advantages and limitations. And whatever I think, whatever I cogitate upon, is the result of my present existence. So I can't jump out of my skin and think of anything which is not prompted by my desires, my aspirations, my samskaras and my training. So any thinking should take into consideration the present situations, the present standpoint. The Buddha called this Samvriti Satya, the truth which is transactional, which is phenomenal. You can't deny that you are existing. You can't deny that you have a particular locale to own. You can't deny that you have your desires, aspirations, fears, and anxieties. So to give due recognition to your present being, the Buddha called Samvriti Satya. Without recognizing this, you can't attain the supreme or supernatural at all. So Samvriti Satya, which in Vedanta was termed Vyavaharika Satya, the empirical, phenomenal, transactional truth. The world might be a figment of one's imagination, but can we forget that we are hungry, we are thirsty, we have to eat, we have to drink? And the best of the Vedantins, when a tiger opposes him, will he not run? There is a story told of two Vedantic teachers. One was, they were walking in a forest, and one was arguing that this whole world is an illusion, it's a phantasmagoria, it does not really exist. He was an Advaitin. So he was saying world is an illusion. And the other Vedantin who followed Ramanuja said, no, the world is real, the world is very much real. World which was created by God is very much real. And as they were arguing, and an elephant was sighted. Both the Vedantins ran for their lives. They climbed the trees. They escaped the danger. And when the elephant went away, both of them joined. They came together. And the man who was arguing that the world was real had a jibe at the other man. Is not world the illusion? Why did you run away? The world is an illusion. The elephant is an illusion. Why did you run away from the illusion? And the other man said, who told you that running was not an illusion? Well, the truth which is phenomenal, which is empirical, it can't be dismissed. So the Buddha pointed out that the Samvriti Satya or Vyavaharika Satya is an aspect of the truth that we have to accede to, we have to accept. And the next truth is not confined to this. This is not the whole truth. This is not the entirety of truth. There is something beyond the limitations of this world. And this they call the Paramartha Satya, Samvriti Satya, Paramartha Satya, the absolute truth and the relative truth, the truth which was relative to all of us, and the truth that is absolute, that does not admit of this realism. And the other contribution is the involvement of the yoga in the methodology to reach the Paramartha Satya or the supreme truth. So Buddha made use of yoga as a necessary expedient. Yoga in the sense of Chittavritti Nirodha, Patanjala Yoga, not the Asana Yoga, but the Patanjala Yoga as a very necessary method by means of which the individual could train himself. And lastly, Buddha spoke about the one consciousness which was the bedrock of everything that exists. He called this Alaya Vijnana. Vijnana, which was the home. So all of us ultimately belong to that. Ultimately belong to that Alaya Vijnana. All of us, all the animals, all the plants, they have one consciousness on which they rest. We are all individuated consciousnesses functioning for some time, and we retire back to that. The Buddha took this from the Upanishadic notion of deep sleep, where every individual goes back to himself. Swam apito bhavati, swapiti iti. What does deep sleep mean? We go back to our own nature, and when we sleep, we are not distinct at all. All our individuated consciousnesses collapse. We are not the body, we are not the sense organs, we don't own a land. That kind of consciousness which is indescribable, which is ineffable, and which is beyond all human conception, this the Buddha called Alaya Vijnana, which in Vedanta was translated as the Atman or the Brahman. So this is, in very broad outline, the contribution of Buddhism. And the other field, and the sister sect that was formed at that time, Mahavira's group, they were called the Ganas. Gana is an organization, and each of these teachers was called a Ganacharya, the Acharya of the Gana. Mahavira was an Acharya of one Gana. Gautama Buddha was an Acharya of another Gana. So Mahavira, he formed his group, and he has contributed a religious regimen, and he has also indicated a philosophical position. Well, in the life of Mahavira, you find that he was closely associated with the Ajivikas. Well, in Indian thought, there are many dark spots. We don't know many of the real links. Broad links we know, but what was it that bridged the gap between the older form of Jainism and the Jainism after the Mahavira's days, there were the Ajivika ascetics. The Ajivikas were those who took philosophy as their livelihood. Those who did nothing else in life except think. As an indolent man said, what do you do most of the times? Most of the times I just sit and think, and oftentimes I don't even think, I just sit. These were the people who thought and made thinking their profession, their livelihood. These were the Ajivikas. And between them, they have fathered many interesting ideas. Makhali Gosala, with whom Mahavira lived for some time, he was the first man to enunciate that even plants have life.